My name is Marcella Boone. I'm 63 years old, a retired school librarian, and a widow. I live, or I used to live, in Asheville, North Carolina, in the brick house my late husband Charles and I built when our son Trevor was still in kindergarten. That day, I was just getting back from a week in Charleston, visiting my sister. The plan was simple: unpack, make a cup of mint tea, and rest my legs. But what I found instead was myself, standing on the sidewalk staring at 4 suitcases that belonged to me. You're hearing this story on Renvenge Zinnia, where truths once buried are told by the very voices who lived them. If you've ever felt pushed aside by the people you gave everything to, if you've ever stared at a door that used to open freely, now locked by someone you helped raise, then this story might feel a little too familiar. And if it does, go ahead and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. You're not alone here. Back on that sidewalk, the 4 suitcases were lined up like baggage at a train station, except the destination was rejection. On the largest suitcase was a note. I knew the handwriting. If you want to stay, the garage is yours. Love, Lainey. The rain started to fall, and right then I realized they'd locked me out, but I was still paying the price. I wish I could say it all happened at once. One big betrayal, one cruel moment that snapped my heart in two. But the truth is, it didn't. It came slowly, quietly, like someone dimming the lights in your own house without asking, one switch at a time. At first, it was little comments. Innocent, maybe, if you didn't know how to listen between the lines. You shouldn't strain yourself in the garden, Marcella. Let's keep things modern. That was Lainey's way of saying my lavender bushes and heirloom tomatoes didn't fit her vision for curb appeal. Charles had built those raised beds for our 25th anniversary. I still remember the way he laughed when we couldn't keep the squirrels out that first season. But the garden disappeared not long after he did. Trevor and Lainey said the yard needed clean lines. They tore everything out one weekend while I was visiting my niece. When I came home, all that was left was river rock. 2 planters and a ceramic frog Lainey thought was whimsical. Then came the reading chair, my chair. A soft brown wingback with embroidery on the arms, a chair Charles had bought me the year I retired from the school library. I used to sit there every morning with coffee, watching the birds at the feeder through the living room window. But one day, it was gone. "Oh," Lainey said, barely glancing up from her laptop. "We moved it to the basement to make space for the new sectional. You can still use it, of course. It's just downstairs now." The chair sat next to the water heater for months, covered in a sheet, surrounded by boxes labeled in Lainey's careful handwriting. Mom's stuff. Not Marcella's books or family photos, just stuff. Like I was a category on a spreadsheet, an inventory item. I told myself not to overreact. I reminded myself, over and over, that Charles would want me to keep the peace, to be patient, to give Trevor and Lainey room to grow into the house the way we once had. But the space I left for them slowly became a void I was disappearing into. It wasn't just the furniture or the garden. It was the music they stopped playing when I entered the room, the glances exchanged over dinner when I asked how Emma was doing in school, the way my suggestions, even the softest ones, were brushed aside like lint. And then came the message. I'd only been gone 3 days visiting my sister in Charleston when Trevor texted, "The garage has everything you need. Please don't be dramatic." That was his response after I asked why my belongings were on the sidewalk and my key no longer worked. Don't be dramatic. As if being locked out of the house you'd built, while you were still paying for it, was somehow theatrical. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering how the boy who once cried when he lost his lunchbox could grow into a man who discarded his mother like an extra piece of furniture. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Ramona. We've been friends since college. UNC Asheville, class of '82. She was with me the day I met Charles. She brought fried chicken to the hospital when Trevor was born. She's the kind of woman who can spot a lie in a smile and call it by name. When she picked up, I didn't even get the greeting out before my voice cracked. "Marcella?" she asked, her tone immediately shifting. "What's going on?" "They packed me into the garage like an old bookshelf," I said, tears I didn't know I'd been holding spilling into the silence. "They didn't even say it to my face, just a note on a suitcase." Ramona didn't ask if I was exaggerating. She didn't suggest I talk to them again or see both sides. She just said, "Honey, you're coming here. Tonight." I drove the 2 hours to her place in Black Mountain with my jaw clenched and my radio off. Somewhere along that winding mountain road, I realized I wasn't just angry. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had let it happen in pieces, that I had made myself small to avoid being inconvenient. When Charles died, everything inside that house started shifting. I thought it was grief, and part of it was. But part of it was Lainey moving in with her opinions and her Pinterest boards and her quiet campaign to reshape the home into something she could control. She didn't take down our wedding photo right away, just moved it from the mantel to the hallway, then to a closet, then, I assume, into one of the mom's stuff boxes. She swapped out the bookshelf for floating shelves with fake plants, replaced my blue and white china with matte black plates that looked like coasters. She even put candles on Charles's old side table, eucalyptus and sandalwood, labeled "Let Go." Ironic in hindsight. And Trevor. He didn't fight it, didn't ask where the chair went, didn't say anything when Lainey replaced the curtains. I sewed myself with something neutral. He just nodded, smiled, and scrolled through his phone. I used to think staying quiet was the right thing, that if I just waited long enough, I'd be welcomed back into the center. But all I got was pushed further out. By the time I pulled into Ramona's driveway, something inside me had snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being erased. And that night, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a borrowed robe, I said it out loud for the first time. They don't see me anymore, not as a person, just as a leftover. Ramona reached over and squeezed my hand. Then it's time you make them see you again. And in that quiet, safe space, for the first time since Charles died, I believed maybe I could. I stayed at Ramona's that night. For the first time in 35 years, I didn't sleep under the roof of the house Charles and I built. I didn't brush my teeth in the same bathroom where we used to playfully argue over counter space. I didn't reach for the chipped mug he always used to call mine. Instead, I slept on her sofa, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. Ramona didn't press me for details. She simply handed me a warm cup of mint tea and placed a folded t-shirt and pajama pants on the armrest, the kind of quiet care only old friends can offer. The next morning, she looked at me with that steady gaze, the kind Charles used to give me when I felt invisible, when the world seemed to forget I mattered. Then she picked up her phone and said, "My nephew Elliot handles elder rights. You're going to meet him today." I had met her nephew, Elliot Traynor, years ago at her husband's retirement party, back when he was fresh out of law school. Now he was a partner at a small but respected firm in Asheville, specializing in elder law. Ramona assured me he was sharp, discreet, and, most importantly, not afraid to fight. When I walked into his office that afternoon, I was nervous, not because of the law, but because of how it felt to be there at all, asking for help, admitting that I, a grown woman with a lifetime of experience and sacrifice, had somehow let this happen. But Elliot didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like a person. He let me talk, start to finish. I told him about the mortgage payments, 26 of them to be exact, paid directly from my checking account, like clockwork. I told him about the note Lainey left on my suitcase. I told him about the chair in the basement, the garden they gutted, the photo of Charles that had vanished from the mantel. When I finished, I expected him to sigh or shift in his chair, but he just nodded. "You've likely established an equitable lien," he said. I blinked. "A what?" "It means," he explained, that by consistently paying the mortgage on a property you don't legally own, especially while deriving no personal benefit and being excluded from that property, you've created what's called a beneficial interest. In plain English? In plain English, Mrs. Boone, you have rights, and they can't sell that house without dealing with you first. I sat there for a long moment, the words soaking in. I had rights. After everything. After being erased, boxed, and set aside, I still had something left. Would it hold up? I asked. In court? More than likely, he said, especially with documentation, and I imagine, knowing you, you kept every statement, every receipt. I smiled for the first time in days. Color-coded folders. Elliot smiled back. Then we're in business. That night, I called Trevor. His voice was guarded when he picked up. Mom? I'd like to meet, I said. Silence. Then, okay. When? Tomorrow, I'll come to the house. Another pause. All right? When I arrived the next day, the same sidewalk greeted me, the same garden now stripped of life. But I wasn't the same. Lainey opened the door. Her expression flickered with something, surprise, maybe guilt, but she recovered fast. Marcella. We weren't expecting. I'm here to speak with Trevor, I said. In the living room, everything had shifted again. My blue quilt was gone from the couch. The bookshelf now held color-coded toys and fake succulents. Even the scent was different. Lavender and lemon, not the cedar I'd loved. Trevor came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Mom, what's going on? I didn't sit. I've been paying the mortgage on this house for over 2 years, I said. Every month. Without fail, while you and Lainey have built your life here, while I've been reduced to mom stuff in boxes. Mom, you let me pay your bills, I said, voice shaking but steady, and then you locked me out of my own life. Lainey tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. And you didn't even leave my bags on the porch. The porch, Trevor. You left them on the sidewalk. His face flushed. It wasn't meant to be like that. But it was, I said, and now things are going to be different. I handed him an envelope, a formal notice that mortgage payments would stop, effective immediately. I watched the color drain from Lainey's face. You can't just stop paying, she said. I can, I replied. And I have. Trevor opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I turned and left without waiting for permission. 2 days later, the bank called. A gentleman named Howard from First United Mortgage left a message asking if I could come in to clarify some details regarding the loan on the Maple Street property. I did, and I brought my folders. Howard was professional but curious. When I showed him the payment records, all from my account, all on time, and explained the situation, he grew quiet. After a moment, he said, "Technically, you've established something we call an equitable lien." I nodded. "That's what my lawyer said." Howard leaned back. "They won't be able to sell without resolving this, not unless they want a legal mess on their hands." "Good," I said, "because that house isn't just equity, it's my life." Later that week, I stood outside a small brick building on the corner of Maple and Sycamore, Juniper and Clay Cafe. I'd passed it 100 times before. Charles and I used to stop there after church, back when they still had the mismatched mugs and warm pecan pie. There was a sign in the window, "Help wanted, part-time server, friendly faces, welcome." I walked in. The manager, Rosa, was around my age, sharp eyes, easy smile. She didn't ask why a woman in her 60s wanted to bus tables. She just handed me an apron and said, "Let's give it a try." That first shift was hard. My knees ached, my back complained, and I forgot a coffee order. But when I slipped my first tip, 2 wrinkled singles and a handful of change, into my apron pocket, I nearly cried. For the first time in years, I earned something that couldn't be taken from me. That night, back at Ramona's, I held the bills in my hand like they were gold. Not because of what they could buy, but because of what they meant. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't helpless. I was still standing. And that That was worth everything. 3 days later, I was rearranging a tray of cookies behind the counter when the bell above the cafe door jingled, and no one looked up but me. When I saw Trevor standing in the doorway, still wearing that fancy smart watch, but with tired, anxious eyes, I knew the moment had come. "Mom," he said softly, almost pleading, we need the house." No greeting, no apology, just a quiet ask from the same man who let my suitcases sit on the sidewalk like trash, now asking for the roof I once built with my husband. I wiped my hands, took off my apron, and said calmly, "Make an appointment," with my lawyer. At the meeting, we sat on opposite ends of Elliot Trainor's long conference table, the kind with the shiny lacquered finish and coasters no one uses. Trevor looked like a hollowed-out version of my son. Lainey, by contrast, looked indignant, hair perfect, arms crossed, tapping her acrylic nails against the manila folder she brought like some kind of shield. Elliot laid out the paperwork. He spoke first, but I'd asked to speak before any terms were agreed on. "I have no intention of dragging this through court," I said, looking directly at them. "But I'm not giving up my rights. I've paid into that house for years, even after my name was erased." Lainey scoffed. "You lived there. It's not like you paid rent." I turned to her. "I wasn't a tenant. I was the one keeping the lights on while you replaced my wedding photo with a bowl of decorative stones." Trevor shifted in his chair. Elliot slid a folder toward them. "Here's what we're proposing. Mrs. Boone," yes, he still called me that, "is willing to pay off the remaining balance of the mortgage, in full. Once that's processed, full title transfers back to her name." Lainey's lips parted in shock. "Wait, you want to buy it back?" "No," I said softly. "I'm reclaiming it." Trevor opened the folder. His eyes darted through the numbers. Almost $68,000 left. Not unmanageable, but it was clear from his twitching jaw that they hadn't expected I had the funds. That was the benefit of having a late husband who believed in backup savings. Charles had always said, "Don't let your name on paper be the only thing that protects you. Let it be the last thing they forget." Elliot continued, "If you choose not to accept, we proceed through court. Mrs. Boone will assert her claim based on sustained contribution post-title transfer, elder financial abuse parameters, and breach of implied trust." Trevor ran a hand through his hair. "How long would that take?" "Could be 6 months, could be 2 years, Elliot replied. "And with a lien in place, the bank can't clear a sale during that time." Lainey glared at me. "You planned this. You set us up." I stared at her, not with fury, not with spite, just the quiet exhaustion of someone who's walked through fire and doesn't owe anyone proof of the burns. "No," I said. "I stopped setting myself up. There's a difference." They signed. Of course they did. Trevor, without a word. Lainey, with a dramatic flourish, like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. The paperwork wasn't the victory. The victory was that I didn't feel smaller in that room. I didn't try to smile. I didn't try to make anyone comfortable. As they left, Trevor turned to say something. I could tell it was one of those unfinished sentences, the kind people offer when they want to sound regretful but not responsible. I shook my head. "Don't." Lainey looked over her shoulder. "You chose property over family." And I said it with more clarity than I ever expected. I chose not to vanish. I moved back into the house on a Saturday, alone. It was surreal. The air smelled like cedar and emptiness. The boxes that once held my life had long been donated or tossed, but the walls were still mine. The creaks in the floorboards remembered me. I slept on a mattress in the living room that night, surrounded by nothing but a stack of books, a flashlight, and a photograph of Charles tucked into a frame I'd salvaged from the garage. In the morning, I opened the curtains. The sunlight poured in. It had never looked so unfiltered before, as if the house itself was relieved to breathe again. There were no apologies from Trevor in the weeks that followed, no letters, no acknowledgement, just silence. And silence, for once, didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. I paid off the mortgage balance within 30 days. Elliot handled the transfer, efficient as ever. When the final documents arrived, I sat at the kitchen counter, the one Lainey had once covered with quartz she claimed looked more modern, and signed my name with a pen I'd kept since the day Charles proposed. Blue ink, smooth stroke, no hesitation. Marcella Boone, homeowner, again, but this time with nothing to prove and no one to impress. Later that week, Ramona stopped by with a bottle of sparkling cider and a welcome home plant in a ceramic pot shaped like a chicken, hideous but endearing, like her. She hugged me tight and whispered, "I hope they understand now." I shook my head. It's not about them understanding. It's about me remembering. She didn't ask what I meant. She just sat beside me on the steps of the front porch, both of us looking out toward the road where it had all started, where my suitcases once sat under the rain. There were no more bags, only roots. That first morning, after Ramona left and the house fell silent again, I walked the hallway alone, not as a guest, not as a tenant, but as someone who had finally returned home, no longer knocking, no longer waiting for permission. This time, the silence wasn't empty. It was mine. Not because it wasn't emotional, but because I'd already done the crying. In Ramona's guest bedroom, in the bank parking lot after canceling the last payment, on the sidewalk in the rain while clutching a note from my daughter-in-law that said, "The garage is yours." No, this moment wasn't about tears. It was about remembering. The floors creaked just the same. The scent of the old oak banister lingered faintly in the hallway, and as I stepped into the living room, I caught my breath at something so small, so silly, it nearly undid me. A faint pencil line on the doorframe, 2 feet off the ground, with T 3 years old scribbled beside it. We used to mark Trevor's height every birthday, each little line a milestone of growth, of belonging. I ran my hand along the frame, not to wipe it away, but to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Presence. I was still here. And now, this place was mine, not just in paperwork, but in dignity. I moved slowly from room to room, touching walls, opening cabinets, sliding my fingers along windowsills I had painted myself years ago in a soft sage green. Upstairs, the room that had once been Charles's study still held that faint scent of pipe tobacco, even though I'd asked him to quit a dozen times. His armchair was gone, probably sold or donated, but I stood in the empty corner where it had once sat and whispered, "I'm home, Charles." I did it. 2 days later, I heard a knock. Through the small window of the front door, I saw Trevor standing on the porch. He was holding something in his hands, tulips, yellow ones. My favorite. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was steady, but I could see tension in the way he shifted his weight. "Emma keeps asking why Grandma's not around." I looked down at the flowers, then back at him. "Is that why you're here? For Emma?" He hesitated. "Partly," he admitted. We stood in silence for a moment. I didn't invite him in. Not yet. "I've been thinking about everything," he continued, "about the house and what happened, and I guess I just—" "You chose a house over family," I said softly. His face tightened. "No, I didn't." But I interrupted, "And I chose not to be erased. For once." He looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. I wasn't the woman who left on trips and came back to her belongings on the sidewalk. I wasn't the mother who quietly paid bills in the background. I was standing in my doorway, in my house, holding the weight of memory and survival in every bone. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "I know," I replied, "but you still did." He held out the tulips. I took them, not for him, but for me. I loved yellow tulips before Trevor was born. I wasn't going to let pain rewrite everything. "I'm not sure how we fix this," he said. "Maybe we don't," I answered gently. "But we start by telling Emma the truth, that Grandma didn't go anywhere. She just stopped shrinking herself. That night, I placed the tulips in a jar that Charles and I had bought on a trip to Tennessee. It wasn't crystal or fancy, but it held water, and that was enough. A week later, I hosted something small in the backyard, just a few people. Ramona brought a bottle of red wine from the co-op. Elliot arrived late, straight from court, still in his jacket. The cafe owner, Shirley, came too with a tray of peach bars and her husband in tow. There were no grand speeches, no violins, just laughter, folding chairs, fireflies blinking in the dusk. At one point, someone toasted. I think it was Elliot. To Marcella Boone, he said, raising his glass, the woman who reclaimed her name. And everyone clinked glasses. I didn't say much that night, but as I sat under the string lights, borrowed from Ramona, and listened to the hum of gentle conversation, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, exactly, but a sturdiness, a quiet kind of homecoming, because this wasn't just a return, it was a beginning. In the days that followed, I painted the kitchen cabinets, replanted the garden, hung up a photo of Charles near the window and placed a small candle beneath it. Not for mourning, but as a reminder that love doesn't vanish when people do. And I did something else. I wrote my name in ink on the back of a framed photograph, the one of Trevor as a child standing next to Charles in the front yard with mud all over their pants and pride in their smiles. I wrote, "To be remembered, you must remain." Then I slid it back into the frame. Sometimes you don't need a monument. You just need a name that doesn't get left off the mailbox. That photograph now sits on the mantle, not behind another photo, not boxed up in the garage, not covered by mom's stuff tape. Visible. And every time I walk past it, I hear myself say what I told Trevor. I chose not to be erased, because in the end, it wasn't just about the house. It was never just a house. It was me. If you've ever felt forgotten, if someone ever tried to write you out of your own story, remember this: your story isn't over until you say it is. This has been Renvenge Zinnia, where stories like mine find a voice and where yours just might begin again too. If my story meant something to you, if it made you feel seen or less alone, I'd be honored if you subscribed. Not for numbers, not for noise, but so we can keep reminding each other that healing doesn't have an expiration date. Thank you for walking this path with me.